With his own TV show and a prominent role in the second Sonic the Hedgehog movie, it's probably hard for people to imagine Knuckles being a bigger deal than he was in 2022. But in 1994, the Red Echidna was, at least in the eyes of the West, Sega's hottest new thing. So exciting was the Red Dreaded one that he got his name on not one, but 2 new games in the space of 6 months. The first was Sonic & Knuckles, the 16-bit swan song for the classic 2D series. The other was Knuckles Chaotix, the first in the Sonic series to arrive on 32-bit home hardware, and that is our topic today, as that game celebrates its 30th birthday. The new game would endure many twists and turns on its journey to the 32X. But did it deliver another classic Sonic style experience? Or was it a huge missed opportunity? Hi, this is Dan the Mega Driver of the Sega Guys, and this is the full story of Knuckles Chaotix. Knuckles the Echidna debuted in 1994's Sonic the Hedgehog 3. That game, being infamously split in half, would be released in 2 parts, with Sonic the Hedgehog 3 being Part 1, and Part 2 seeing Sonic and Knuckles share the game title in Sonic & Knuckles. Despite neither game matching the commercial heights of the original Sonic the Hedgehog or its first sequel on Mega Drive, the character of Knuckles was very well received, especially in the West. Quickly, Knuckles appeared in a lot of Sonic the Hedgehog promotional material and auxiliary media, primarily the UK and US comics. Those appearances only heightened the character's appeal, and it wasn't long before Knuckles would have his own stories and entire comic books in his sole name. In parallel to this, and the development and release of Sonic & Knuckles, Sega were working on the next Sonic project. A prototype was developed that gave the focus on 2-player cooperative gameplay. This game, featuring Sonic and Tails tethered together, goes by a number of names. Sonic Stadium in its ROM header, which is likely a misspelling of Sonic Stadium, and Sonic Crackers, as per the name's simple black title screen, hypothesised to be a misromanization of Sonic Clackers, which is like the toy which sees 2 balls connected by a piece of string. Crackers features a number of elements that the final game would sport. The gameplay concept of the tethered characters, the ability to scale walls, early versions of certain music tracks, the labelling of stages as attractions, and the ability to access those stages out of order via the Game World Hub. Crackers runs on base Mega Drive or Genesis hardware and can be considered a prototype or a proof of concept for Chaotix, which came later. It was never shared externally with the media and didn't lead to any announcement on the platform. Instead, development shifted to the next generation, but not the console that you're thinking of. Yes, development of this next generation 32-bit platformer moved to the Sega Saturn, Sega's flagship console that, in hindsight, would have absolutely killed for a new Sonic game to grace its library in 1995. What you're seeing is gameplay from a prototype build, however this is still from an early 32X version. Unfortunately, no one has ever seen the Sega Saturn build, at least not that I know of. What the Saturn version of Chaotix, if it was even called that, would have looked like is completely unknown. The only details that we have are from an interview with Tom Kalinske, in which Tom said that the game was too big, it was taking too long, it was over budgeted, and it was behind schedule. So the decision was made to move the project to the 32X because the platform needed more games. The inference here is that it was actually going to be a true Sonic game, rather than a Knuckles-led one, but ultimately no traces of that Saturn project have ever surfaced. All us, as fans, can do is speculate and enjoy this ROM hack which adds Sonic to the game to get an idea of what could have been. Such was the rampant pace of game development in the 90s that the earliest prototype of the game, having now moved to the Sega 32X, is from December 1994, just 8 months on from the Crackers prototype, having moved between 3 platforms and deemed to be taking far too long. This prototype, while obviously not complete, features the game in a state closer to the final product than you might expect. The first prototype is seemingly the basis for many of the previews at the time, with some magazines going as far back as December reporting on this new Sega platformer, in some cases referred to Knuckles Ring Star, which it seems was an early title for the game. Early impressions were enthusiastic. The increased colour palettes, scaling effects and early versions of the 3D polygonal special stages especially were very warmly received. The hype, once again, was building for a new Sonic game, albeit this time without Sonic himself, with the promise of new hardware delivering a generational leap for the series. Within comics and magazines there were previews, competitions and interviews on this 32X centrepiece. Central to much of the appeal in the auxiliary media was the Chaotix team themselves. From Tails to Knuckles, from Amy to Knack, new characters at the time drummed up some excitement for new Sonic games, and Chaotix featured an entirely new team. Well, the team was new, but only 3 characters were making their debut, and which 3 they were may actually surprise you. You see, Mighty the Armadillo debuted in the 1993 Sega Sonic arcade game. Vector the Crocodile originated from Sonic's band, which was created for the original Sonic the Hedgehog game before being scrapped, though Vector did appear in the manga in the said band. Speaking of the manga, that's also where Charmy B first appeared, who was then also repurposed by none other than Naoto Oshima for this game. The 3 new characters then are Espio the Chameleon and Heavy and Bomb. No one likes to talk about Heavy and Bomb, and we'll go into why a little bit later, but they are very much part of Chaotix in this game, and are even named among the core cast in the act cards. So why is this menagerie of anthropomorphic heroes and renegade robots battling Dr. Robotnik on a strange island? Depends who you ask. In the English language manual, Knuckles is apparently the guardian of Carnival Island, and Dr. Robotnik attacks to gain the power emerald that gives the theme park energy. I have questions, like why is Knuckles the guardian of 2 islands? How is it even possible to guard 2 entirely separate landmasses, one of which is in the sky? And why does he care about powering a theme park that, ostensibly, no one uses? And why are Chaotix even there? The Japanese story is more consistent. Here, Dr. Eggman discovers an island and on it, the remnants of a lost civilization and a ring like those found on Angel Island, imbued with the Master Emerald's power. After building his base, the rest of the Chaotix team investigate, only to find themselves trapped by the Doctor and Metal Sonic. Knuckles, curious of the island, presumably due to its links with the floating island, investigates. Now that makes more sense, doesn't it? I don't know what they were smoking when they penned the US story. Anyway, regardless of all of that, when the game starts, you play as Knuckles, having just arrived on the island, and he quickly stumbles across Dr. Robotnik, who has Espio trapped in a container. A cutscene ensues, where Metal Sonic arrives and carts off the Doctor, and the game begins proper, after a short tutorial. A tutorial in a Sonic game? Well yes, because of the game's unique setup. As you've no doubt seen from the footage of Chaotix and Sonic Crackers so far, the entire principle of the game is to have 2 characters on screen at any one time, connected by a pair of rings that act as a rubber band of sorts. As such, C jumps, the B button makes your CPU character hold in the same place or picks them up when they're near, and the A button summons them to you for the cost of 10 rings. The tethering creates some rather interesting gameplay physics. Holding while you run in a direction and then letting go at the right time can give the team a tremendous boost of speed. It even helps characters ping pong upwards, navigating high platforms. It may feel awkward at first, but you do get used to it. In fact, I'd go as far as to say that I enjoy this mechanic. When you get used to how certain movements work, it's both useful and enjoyable. In the opening stage, called Isolated Island, whereby there are no enemies as the stage transitions from day to dusk to night, you are given a slew of problems only these mechanics can solve. It's a nice easy tutorial stage that remains engaging throughout. The problem, as we will see, is maintaining that level of stage design and engagement. For now though, it's easy to become besotted with Chaotix's charms. As a 1995 game, there was little else like it visually. While it may be a 2D platformer like Sonic's prior games, there's an abundance of graphical finesse here unlike any other platformer that had come before. The abundance of colour is a considerable step up from the base Mega Drive. The 32X may have been capable of less colours than the Saturn and PlayStation, which had just launched in Japan, and only slightly more colours than the SNES, but the boost over the standard Mega Drive games is very welcome. In the first 5 minutes, the game throws several effects your way. You have the distortion of sprites via the trap that Knuckles frees Espio from, Metal Sonic and Dr. Robotnik circle around the screen demonstrating sprite scaling, and then that same sprite scaling is demonstrated again when picking up one of the size changing power-ups. You then get the transition through the isolated island's various colour palettes, showcasing the game's greater colour depth, and then this culminates with entry to the game's special stage. Because this intro level almost guarantees the player 50 rings, you get to blast through the polygonal world with a nice, welcoming entry to the special stage's concept. It's very easy to come away from that opening segment extremely impressed. From there you select your character from one of 5. Each one has their own skills and abilities. For example, Knuckles is pretty much as he was in Sonic & Knuckles in that he is able to glide and climb walls. Mighty plays and looks a lot like Sonic the Hedgehog, but he also has this nifty wall jump. In fact, all characters are now able to scale walls. Vector can climb very much like Knuckles and also do a mid-air dash, whereas SBO will flat out run vertically up walls himself. Charmy is the wild card because unlike the others, he doesn't have a spin attack or a spin dash, but he does fly, and pressing the jump button works as a dash of sorts that can also destroy enemies. The game opens with you descending into the new Trogic High Zone that acts as a hub world and feels like the entrance to a theme park, not least because the various zones, called attractions, are displayed like various lands in Disney World. The images of those attractions depict your progress through each one, but you can't select them, at least not yet. And really, do you get to select them at all? Let's get into that. First you need a partner. So let's back up a little bit. Chaotix can actually be played with 1 or 2 players. If you're playing with a friend, you get to select a character each and then you go on your merry way, with your characters bound together. Simple enough, you just play through with a friend with your characters of choice. Playing solo though still imposes those rubber banding mechanics on you, so you'll need a partner. You don't just pick one though, no, that would be way too simple. Instead, you use a claw machine, and yes, it's almost as random as it sounds. You enter the control area and move the claw from left to right to drop and pick a partner from the 9 slots below. 9? But isn't there only 5 characters? Nope, as I said before, there are 7 characters. 4 slots are filled with the player characters you didn't choose to play as at the beginning, and the other 5 are filled with Heavy and Bomb. You see, even though storyline wise Heavy and Bomb claim to have rebelled against Dr. Robotnik, they do little more than hinder rather than help. So that means you have a 5 to 4 chance of picking a dud, which isn't helped by the fact that the character slots switch at random. So you may get a decent partner and you may get Heavy or Bomb, and we'll get to why that's such a hindrance, I swear. For now though, regardless of who you pick, you get this interesting animation, more special effects, accompanied by a bit of slowdown, and then you go right to select your level, with yet another random feature. This time you find yourself in the position with the 5 screen selection, going through a roulette, and then you hit the bumper to make the roulette stop and your selector stop on a attraction. With that ordeal out of the way and the level selected, you jump on the slider and away you go. As you may have guessed, because of this feature, aside from the isolated island opening tutorial stage, and of course the endgame sections, there's no real defined zone order here. You play each of the 5 zones in any order. Each attraction has 5 acts, and while every visit to each attraction sees the acts increment, the order of the zones is not set. In the playthrough that I used to capture footage, I got to the end of Amazing Arena, yet had only passed Act 1 of Speed Slider and Botanic Base. Each attraction has a gimmick of sorts. Speed Slider features huge winding ramps that characters can hurtle along at full speed, taking the rollercoaster gameplay of Sonic the Hedgehog to its absolute apex, though obviously that means these stages are the least interactive. Marina Madness has you navigate the eponymous marina using switches to move the ships around the stage to unlock the exit. Techno Tower is probably the second least interesting attraction, essentially just giving players a climb to the top of the stage. It makes a change as opposed to just going from left to right, but that's about it. Amazing Arena meanwhile is arguably the most inventive. The stages start off in a near monochrome colour scheme with some tracks that straddle the line between mysterious and ear-splitting. Your goal is to find the big clock in the act. Hit the button next to the clock and the area explodes with colour and the music changes. As opposed to the other attractions, most of these acts have a sub-boss via this strange semi-3D TV with arms and a floating Dr. Robotnik head. Worth noting is that if you finish an act in Amazing Arena without finding the clock, you will fail the act and have to replay it. Different, but pretty cool, I think. Botanic Base though is the easiest and most straightforward stage. There's no real special gimmick here, it functions pretty much as the game's Green Hill equivalent, but due to the random nature of the stage select, it may not be the first stage that you access, so I guess the gimmick here is that there is no gimmick? In case it's not apparent right now, Chaotix does everything that it can to make changes to the established Sonic formula. Zone selection is semi-randomised, character selection also has an element of chance, then there's the rubber band mechanic and the fact that each character has their own set of skills, though all can scale walls, making vertical traversal much more common when used in conjunction with the ring physics. If you're unlucky enough to have picked Bomb or Heavy as a partner, things can get a little, well, not difficult, but irritating. Heavy is, as the name implies, heavy. Now the physics in Chaotix definitely deserve some praise. Evolving Sonic's momentum-based gameplay based on character weight is a feat upon itself. When using Charmy or Vector, or when a character has used the Shrink or Grow power-up, the heavier or lighter the character becomes affects the physics of the gameplay. All in all, that component is pretty cool. The character Heavy though cannot jump and carries a lot of forward momentum, though can often act as an anchor for the player. Think of him as a juggernaut, hard to get moving, but once it gains speed, it's impossible to stop. This, of course, makes things tricky when platforming or attacking enemies, and precision absolutely goes out the window with that character. Bomb, meanwhile, isn't as much of a weight, but they will explode when they hit an enemy. Not as soon as they hit an enemy, however. When they hit an enemy and bounce back, they will damage not just your foes, but your player character too. You can't select these annoyances to play directly, though you can control them if you hit the switch character power up. They're both pretty useless. Heavy in particular is unable to jump more than a few pixels off of the ground. Those characters can access the special stages though, which is kind of amusing. But quite why they feature in this game to annoy the player is one of the more egregious design decisions, which makes the claw selection part of this game such a chore. You can quite easily dodge Heavy and Bomb in the claw selection, but at least once or twice you will accidentally select them, which breaks your run on the act. Now the acts themselves aren't tough. I don't think I've ever actually died in any of the areas in all my years in playing Chaotix. Even by Sonic the Hedgehog standards, just getting to the goal sign is exceptionally easy. Amazing Arena's sub-boss can be a little annoying at times, but aside from that, these stages are a breeze, which is probably why you can approach them from any order. That being said, the goal, like all Sonic games, is to beat Chaotix after finishing all the special stages. Here, there's no emeralds, instead Knuckles and Co collect Chaos Rings. It's all much of a muchness as they serve the same purpose. There are 6 Chaos Rings, and so there are 6 special stages. Special stages themselves have you collecting blue spheres while running through a 3D polygonal tube. It's like it's taking bits from Sonic 3 and Sonic 2 special stages, smushing them together, making it fully polygonal, but the result is less than the sum of its parts. The biggest issue for these special stages is the draw distance. It's so incredibly short that it makes finding those blue spheres exceptionally difficult, as the stages contort to master clipping or outright can't draw the game 5 feet in front of you, and can often obscure blue spheres and pits, which will end your special stage run. Combine that with some stiff camera movement and the trickier special stages become an absolute slog to get through. You also have to play these stages against the clock, and that clock is governed by how many rings you have. Run out of rings and you fail the special stage. Which then brings us back round to the main game. You need 50 rings to start each special stage, that's fine, but seldom is 50 rings enough, as some special stages wind on for an enormous amount of time. And so each act becomes a mission, not to reach the goal, but to gather as many rings as possible to stand the best chance of getting a Chaos Ring in the special stage. That means that losing rings during a run can be absolutely catastrophic, and that is why Heavy and Bomb are so annoying, but also where the rest of the game kind of falls apart. You see, Chaotix was rushed to market. Not only was the development diverted from the Sega Saturn, but by April 1995, the 32X was already dying. It needed Knuckles Chaotix, so the game was rushed to stores. That rush job is evident in the stage design. Often the layouts will appear haphazard and random. There are people that criticise Sonic CD's stage design, but Chaotix is so much worse without the excuse of having to accommodate 4 different time periods. Enemies are placed in positions that jar with usual Sonic stage design, breaking up the speed and gameplay, and that isn't helped by the rubber band system since your player character is usually to the right of the screen, making it harder to react to enemies in your path. So maintaining that crucial ring count when the level design is so unpredictable becomes a lot less fun. There is something of a crutch though. Bonus stage rings are littered around the levels. If you find one and enter one of these stages, you enter a 3D falling section with plenty of power-ups and rings to collect. These suffer the same issue as the special stages insofar as they have really terrible draw distance, but once you get the hang of them, you can snatch up an absolute abundance of rings to finish the level with. These special stages also give you bonuses that alleviate some of the other headaches, allowing you to fully control the claw machine for example, or select your stage. So when it comes to the main body of the game, the usual acts and the stages, there really isn't much more to say about it that I already haven't touched on when I was talking about the various gimmicks. The stages just don't have the personality or the intricate design of classic Sonic games, and their gimmicks become a little one note after a while, and the constant quest for rings whilst wrestling with the enemy placement and stage design does sap some of the fun out of the experience. Each attraction has 5 acts, which, when added to the opening stage and the hub or boss stage, produces a meaty 27 stages to get through. With 6 special stages and a bonus stage, that's a lot of content, with more main acts than the combined Sonic the Hedgehog 3 and Knuckles. But the problem is that it's sloppily designed and often quite repetitive. Even the end of zone bosses feel scrappy. There's less rhythm in these battles with Dr. Robotnik to enable players to find a pattern. Each boss battle usually features an obvious weak spot that can be pounded quite easily by taking a hit. Not that it matters, since the mechanics and boss attacks usually mean that you're going to take damage anyway, so once again, the whole thing comes off as less of a challenge and more of an annoyance. The worst of all of these is the Botanic base boss. This battle just feels broken. I can see what they were trying to do, but it doesn't work. The player dangling from their captured partner like some sort of bungee jumper, the movement just so often becomes completely locked. Each boss does come with its own intro sequence though, which is pretty cool, with a brief animation showing them arriving or jettisoning from their structure. And with that in mind, it's probably a good time to talk about the visuals and presentation again. Just like everything else, it's not hard to pick at the surface level colour boost and scaling effects until they fall apart. Slowdown is a common occurrence in this game, much more than any other Sonic game, likely owing to the fact that the 32X is not well equipped for platform games. Just look at its port of Pitfall the Mayan adventure. Not only is the performance occasionally very poor, but despite the colour and effects, the art direction regularly feels disjointed. Characters can look wildly inconsistent. Just look at Mighty, whose sprite was adapted from Sonic, and compare his bold and simple design to Knuckles' high contrast, extremely detailed character model. One looks like he's from a cartoon or a Mega Drive game, the other seems to be auditioning for a part in Donkey Kong Country. And that clash of styles is all over the game, from bosses that throw pixel art, pre-rendered graphics and polygonal visuals at you, sometimes all at once, to enemies that often look out of place, often because their designs weren't finished. Just look at this badnik here in Amazing Arena and its complete lack of any animation whatsoever. Then there's Dr. Robotnik himself, who sometimes looks like a more detailed version of his Mega Drive sprite, but sometimes looks like a cross between his Sonic 06 rendition and the one that was in that Sonic fan film from 2013. Him. A neat touch though is that all the zones transition through a day or night cycle. You get dawn, noon, dusk and night colour palettes for each zone to make each one seem fresh. I say seem though, again at a surface level it adds some visual variety, but you soon realise that there's something off, like why is there so much purple? Every stage has an abundance of purple, from the platforms in Botanic Base to the background in Speed Slider, from the hub to the bonus stages. Purple, purple, purple. Why? 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 It's a shame because I do love a lot of the visual design from this game. The fonts, the title cards, the HUD, the colour scheme, it's all just so 90s, leaning heavily into that Memphis design aesthetic that carried over from the late 80s. It's as if someone ate The Apartment from Three Men and a Baby, 2 Unlimited's No Limit music video, the entire series of Saved by the Bell and a Smash Hits magazine from 1995 and bathed it all up into a Sega 32X card. Far more than Sonic the Hedgehog himself, Chaotix truly is a visual representation of its time, right down to the random shapes and patterns showing up just about everywhere. There's so much to love here, but it always seems to come up just short. Nowhere is this more evident than the final boss, Metal Sonic. Having Sonic's doppelganger, his most iconic robotic adversary in Chaotix, feels hugely exciting. Once you beat all 5 attractions and their bosses, he soars into the Neutrogic High Zone and the battle is a letdown. You see, remember that zone selector? That becomes the mechanic for this fight. Rather than battling Metal Sonic hand to hand, he sits in the foreground, initiating the selection roulette as the selector cycles from 1 to 4, with an X in the centre. Hit the bumper when it lands on X to damage Metal Sonic and remove that number. Land on a number and he initiates a trap that you have to avoid. It's pretty lame. You can time the hits easily enough and you only have to land 4 of them, and as the roulette speeds up at the last hit, it just feels more random in an irritating way. But even if you get hit, just wait until your partner returns and then you can go again. After 4 hits, Metal Sonic is damaged and somehow just slinks off to Dr. Robotnik, who does something with one of the power rings, and suddenly Metal Sonic is transformed into a gigantic red monster. Again, ooh and ah is maxed with and why. The transition to the boss feels rushed. Given how intricate some of the other boss introductions were, it's further evidence of the project seemingly running out of time and or funding. And just like the other bosses, this battle feels scrappy. There's some cool stuff in it. You throw your partner at Metal Sonic Kai and a raft of explosions follow. Eventually, his arm comes off and he moves into the background to swipe at you with his other arm, though this can be cheesed by hiding it in the right hand corner and just spin dashing it. Destroy that arm and he jumps back into the main gameplay plane with his big old laser. Throw your partner at him a few more times while dodging his pew-pews and you beat the game. And that's where you get one of 2 endings. The good ending is pretty meh. It's the title screen but with Sonic and Tails on Tails' biplane, and Sonic's legs are the wrong colour. The bad ending? We'll take a look. It's a bit more dramatic than the usual, and one I'm pretty sure most players will want to avoid, given that Metal Sonic Kai is setting the world on fire. So if you get this ending, you'll need to start a brand new game and grapple with the ring collecting in the messy main stages all over again. It may sound like I'm being overly negative on this game, and I'm not. There's a lot of great stuff in here. It's just that for everything the game does right, it does something very wrong. There's an exception though, and that is the music. In case it hasn't been clear already, the music in Chaotix is absolutely outstanding. You've probably heard several of the fantastic themes throughout this video so far, from the iconic Door to Summer that plays through the game's tutorial stage, to the funky, bassy vibes of Midnight Greenhouse, which plays during Botanic Base. From the up-tempo speed of sound that plays during Speed Slider, to the chill seaside beats of Seascape that plays during Marina Madness. And then you have the abundance of remixes of the Neutrogic High Zone theme. All of that means Chaotix is an absolute feast for the ears with no drawbacks. Yes, even Labyrinth, which is the theme that plays at the start of Amazing Arena, works well within the context of the song, given that it's purposefully jarring. All of these fantastic tunes can be played in the game's sound test mode that helpfully lays out the different sound chips used for each track. Speaking of which, there are some cheats in Chaotix, accessed by manipulating the colour test mode, one of which has Amy Rose dance along to the tune that you're playing in sound test. That means that almost every major character from the Sonic series to that date was in the game, in some form, aside from Nat the Weasel or Fang the Sniper, who ironically was part of Chaotix in their debut in Sonic the Comic. Anyway, the remnants of Sonic the Hedgehog can be seen in the Mighty sprite that he was repurposed into. And Tails? Well, again, aside from the ending, his code does seemingly exist in the game. Use the colour test mode for the game's level select and you can select a character whose name is redacted with a series of asterisks. Select them and you get a corrupted version of Knuckles, who the fandom have called Weknia, which does seem to move a little bit like Tails. That's right, the game's rushed development is evident here too, with data present that was presumably from the Sonic Crackers prototype not being removed completely for the full retail release. So Chaotix is, like the name suggests, chaotic. It looks great, even if I kinda wish there was a little less purple and a lot less slowdown. It plays well, though the level design and bosses feel sloppy, rushed and haphazard. It has some great ideas, such as the rubber band mechanics and 3D special stages, though the special stages in particular have a number of issues. And the game sounds amazing from an audio perspective. All in all, Chaotix is a fun yet very mixed bag. Sadly, if you're after a physical copy of this game, it's going to set you back a lot of money. My copy is easily the most expensive retro game I have ever bought, and I think the problem is that Sonic collectors will buy one or more copies of Chaotix without necessarily having a 32X to play it on, so demand in the end massively outstrips supply. Still, if you do have a Sega 32X, there's always the EverDrive carts, and even if you don't have a physical console, you can always resort to emulation. But if you do spend a bomb on a physical copy, you will likely be disappointed. Chaotix doesn't live up to the promise of a game that costs that much money, but then what does? Sadly though, even at the time, Chaotix underdelivered as a next-gen 32-bit Sonic title. And that's the thing, Chaotix has so much potential and it squanders it. Most of this is down to the rushed and turbulent development cycle it had. The development team on Chaotix were mostly veterans from Sonic the Hedgehog CD. Even Oshima had some involvement. Imagine, if you will, a Chaotix game that starred Sonic instead of Knuckles, appeared on the Saturn instead of the 32X, with a full development cycle behind it. That could have been something really special, possibly close to Sonic Mania in terms of quality. The Sega Saturn could have really benefited from that sort of Sonic title in 1995, and Chaotix would have really benefited from the Saturn's superior 2D and 3D capabilities, so the game itself could have really been something spectacular. What we have now? Chaotix is still a fun game, but it's not all that it could have been, and 30 years on, it's Chaotix's lost potential that hurts the most. This has been Dan the Mega Driver of the Sega Guys, and we will see you on the Sega side.